Welcome. So in this module, we are going to talk about rewriting your teacher narrative. What does that mean? Well, you may be familiar with my ECHO framework. So in all the years that I've been teaching teachers how to have a more positive experience, I have broken it down into a framework of really four major things. And let's look at them. So the ECHO framework is, the E stands for energy. Your energy teaches more than your lesson plans. We have been talking about that a lot. That's the whole point of the positive mindset habits, right? Not just to have a more positive teaching experience for yourself, but because it delivers better for your students. Okay, so that's the E. The C is you can choose your reaction, focusing on what you can control. Talked about that in the last module. Okay? H, happiness can be synthesized. That's our whole premise with the happy habits, right? Working on the intentional activities that can improve our happiness quotient. So here we come to the O, other teachers' experience doesn't need to be your experience. Okay, and so that is what we're going to work on in this module in the next 4 lessons, which is rewriting your teacher narrative. Because, let's be honest, I'm going to say probably everywhere, for sure I know in Northern America, but maybe everywhere, the narrative, pretty negative, right? The narrative, the collective narrative around education is that teachers are overworked, underpaid, underappreciated, and more recently, political pawns kind of under attack. Okay, and I'm not saying those things aren't true. There is a lot to be negative about, but the collective narrative, like I say, is very, very negative, and it is reinforced by all the memes that we see, all the social media posts, and it is true of a lot of teachers' experience, but it isn't true of every teacher's experience. There are still some teachers out there having a positive experience, loving education, loving spending the day with their students, being creative, feeling productive and appreciated. There are probably those teachers somewhere on your campus, and I got to tell you, for the better part, the very better part of 20 years, that teacher was me. And I was not always, and I'm even going to say not often, surrounded with teachers who told themselves the same narrative. My narrative for a long time was like teaching was like I had won the jackpot. Really, after I came to teaching as a second career teacher, you probably know that. I'd had a very stressful corporate job. To me, teaching came easy and it made me happy and it had purpose and it allowed for connection and beautiful things. And so that was my narrative. And that's not me being delusional. That we're going to talk about a little bit more, but that's what we're going to focus on in this module, is making your own teacher narrative. And let me tell you just a little bit more about that. We're going to start with a quote, and that quote is from Robin Sharma. He wrote the book, The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. I love this quote. It says, "Remember, we see the world not as it is, but as we are. Most of us see through the eyes of our fears and our limiting beliefs and our false assumptions." Right? So your eyes are not just something that we use to see with, but they're also kind of the lens through which we perceive things. So I'm going to talk just real briefly about the science, just a little bit, I won't nerd out, and then I will tell you about the 4 lessons coming up. Okay, so you may know, nerd alert, that I have spent a very long time, almost 2 decades, studying neuro-linguistic programming. Yeah, that's nerdy. So a lot of that is looking at how our brain makes sense. What we like to say is the map is not the territory, right? How our brain filters information and comes up with a reality. So we'll talk about that in just a little bit. So I do want to remind you, I'm not a therapist, neither do I play one on the internet. But I have studied NLP. I am like kind of nerdy about the brain stuff. I have managed to rewire my own brain to be happier. I have studied the research. I also certified life coach in emotional quotient. Who cares? I'm going to make it simple. Right, you might remember these things from Psychology 101. You probably had to take the classes. Confirmation bias, self-fulfilling prophecies, limiting beliefs. So what does it boil down to? It boils down to this, is that our brain cannot possibly absorb all of the information that is being thrown at us. Right? We don't make a conscious effort to, oh, I have to remind my beat to heart. I don't need my heart to beat. I don't need to remind my lungs to breathe. Right? There are things that we do automatically, unconsciously. Well, a lot of our thinking is unconscious. There's so much sensory input that comes in that we filter things out. We notice some things over others. We make meaning of what we see. And when we make meaning of what we see, obviously that's based on our experience. It's based on kind of our programming that in many cases is unconscious, our beliefs, our assumptions. Right? We filter out information. And so that's why when we say that we see the world as we are, not as it is. You know this. You know this. Have you ever had a student that you dreaded having based on another teacher? You know, every time you saw that teacher, or you were in the lunchroom and they were just ragging on this kid. Oh my gosh, this kid. It's only ever heard the negative stuff, right? And then you see that kid's name on your roster and already you're like, well, me, I would always make a mental note. Love on this kid. This kid has challenges. This kid is an opportunity for me to grow. I would really try and set my mindset like he had or she had a miserable experience last year with this teacher from all that we can observe. Let's try and make that situation positive. And then lo and behold, I'm not saying every day was a party, but they were not like your biggest challenge in the classroom, right? You had a totally different experience with that child, okay? Or an entire grade, right? So you know this, okay? So you can rewrite the narrative. You can tell a different story. And once you start telling a different story to yourself, you will notice different things and your experience will be better. It takes intention. And so here are the 4 things in the next 4 lessons. What we are going to focus on is doing exactly that. Okay? So in this module, the first lesson, we're going to examine your teaching story. You're going to do a powerful exercise on really figuring out what are your limiting beliefs around teaching. Do you think teaching is getting harder and harder? I think all students are getting more and more disrespectful. We're going to look at it from a bunch of different angles. You're going to work through the exercise and it's going to give you information. What do I always say? Awareness comes choice. So first you need to be aware of what you're thinking. Then in the next lesson or the next week, if you want to do it weekly like we usually do, I'm going to give you some tools to help you catch yourself storytelling. And then what you can do about that. And then in the third lesson, one of the things that really I see a lot of teachers get hung up on and causes so much stress is that we identify so much as being a teacher. Like that's our whole identity. And so when that isn't going well, and when we have limiting beliefs and stories about that, it impacts everything. So we're going to do some work in lesson 3 on kind of untwining our identity from teaching. We're not just a teacher. We fulfill many roles in life. If you couldn't teach tomorrow, you would still have massive intrinsic value to so many people and to this world. And so we'll look at that. And then in the 4th lesson, we are going to really by design, not by default. We are going to design and imagine for ourselves what would our ideal teaching experience look like and train ourselves to look for evidence on that. So that's what we have going in this module. I'm so excited you're here. As always, thank you for investing in yourself. I cannot wait to get started. 4 lessons coming up. Do on 1 a week if you choose, or binge watch, whatever you want to do. I will see you in the next lesson.